The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, An Introduction to Agile, the new mainstream approach to software delivery. My name is Sarah and I will be helping out with today's session. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate. This webinar is being recorded. We will provide a link to the recording as soon as it is available. Now you have joined today's webinar listening through your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to use your telephone, just locate your audio pane and select Use Telephone. The dial-in information and access code will then be displayed. Attendees are in listen-only mode, and we invite you to ask questions about the presentation using the questions pane. Just type in your question and click Send. At the end of the webinar, we will do a Q&A session and take as many questions as possible. I'd also invite you to join the conversation with us on Twitter. We are at GK Canada, and we're on the hashtag GK Summer School. Now let me introduce you to our speaker today. Julianne Jones is a program management consultant as well as being a facilitator. She has extensive experience in leadership roles and coaching Agile teams in a diverse range of sectors such as energy, healthcare, financial services, and telecom. Julianne is a certified project manager, Agile certified practitioner, and has a certificate in change management. Thank you for being here today, Julianne, to share your expertise and experiences with us, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thank you so much for the kind introduction. So welcome, everybody. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here talking to you about one of my favorite topics, which is Agile. I'm passionate about Agile because I've been using Agile for a long time, and I've seen the benefits that it has, not just to corporations and the companies that adopt Agile, but also in the lives of the team members working in Agile, both on the business side and the IT side. And I guess a fun fact about me is I hated Agile at the beginning. When I was first introduced to Agile, I had been fairly successful with traditional project management, and I was a command and control project manager. When I was introduced to Agile, I just thought, I'm destined for failure. I was working at an organization that was doing Agile. I'd never heard of it before, and after I went through my 2-week orientation, I started dusting off my resume because I was convinced that this would be big black marks on my resume. And my first project was strangely successful. But again, not being a believer, I just assumed, hey, I must have had a really good team. But then my second Agile project was really successful. On time, on budget, the team was happy. I was a consultant working in professional services. My clients were really happy. And it just kind of seemed to all go really well. Then I did my third project, and the third project I did using Agile was using Agile, but in a globally distributed environment. I had teams in North America, in actually 2 North American cities, and I had an offshore team working in India. And that project, too, was successful. That's when I started to think there must be a little bit something more to this. I must be missing something, and started to dig in and really understand how is it that Agile is able to consistently deliver high-quality business outcomes. And that's really what we're after. Agile is about delivering value to the business outcomes, high-value business outcomes, not so much about did we deliver on time, on budget with a promised amount of functionality. Let's look at some of the common project problems. One of the first problems that we face in the waterfall world is scope problems. And theoretically, according to PMI, and as Sarah mentioned, I have all the certifications, PMP, scope should change. If we add or remove from scope, schedule or resources should change accordingly. But I think for those of us on the ground, the practitioners know that's really not kind of the way it works. The business or our clients will add more scope, but after they add more scope, they typically say you still have to deliver at the same time and you still have to deliver with the same amount of resources. Well, good luck with that. So we tend to have a lot of scope creep, and that tends to cause projects to be delayed and over budget. We also suffer from schedule problems. And this is another one of my favorites because we typically have bad estimates of effort. With Waterfall, we put a lot of time and effort into being both accurate and precise. We do function point analysis, we do PERT, we throw in some standard deviation, and all of this analysis is actually based on assumptions. And if your experience is anything like my experience, it's based on assumptions that have assumptions that have assumptions. And as I'm fond of saying, when your assumptions have grandchildren, that does not make for a solid, accurate plan. And the business simply, in just the world, when once we socialize our project plan, they don't understand that, hey, this is just an estimate. And an estimate, by its very nature, is uncertain. practice has shown that once we put that project plan, that MSP, Microsoft Project Plan, out there into the world, the dates and the dollars become written in stone. So the whole notion of an estimate being uncertain goes out the window, and we're often over cost and over budget. Same things with resource problems. So the same things with estimates applies to money as it does with time. But budget cuts presents an even more interesting dilemma. If we're midway through a project, we've gone through requirements gathering, we've gone through design, and maybe we've just started to move into the build phase of the project, and our budget gets cut. What do we have to give to the client that can actually give them value? Really nothing. A lot of documents that we've created. There's absolutely nothing that we can give them that's going to be of any actual use. And then down the road, if we do get budget back, we have to do rework, validating our requirements, validating our design decisions before we can pick up where we left off. So you tend to get a lot of extra waste, and it really does impede our ability to deliver value to the business because, again, we're working in this mode, this waterfall world of economies of scale where we design all at once, build all at once, etc. Last but not least, again, in my experience on waterfall projects, is the people who deliver last, the people who have the last phase of the project are the people that get squeezed. Design runs late, which causes development to run late. Development runs late, but we still have to make our date. So who gets squeezed? The QA people. And what ends up happening is we have a choice to make. It's a hard choice to make. Either we move the date or we go in dirty. Our solution has a lot of defects. And I've delivered more than my fair share of projects where I've presented this option to my steering committee, to my executive directors, and they've said, we can't miss the date, so we're willing to take our chances going in with defects. And that causes many potential issues externally as well as internally, from customer impacting to internal issues, our ability to support and maintain this application. So this is really where Agile came from. Agile is really in reaction to these common challenges. And we've been doing software development for at least 30, 40 years, and we're still suffering with the same problem. In 2001, a group of software craftsmen got together and said, we can do this in a better way. What does that look like? And they took a whole bunch of concepts that aren't new. There's really nothing new or revolutionary about Agile. They took a bunch of old stuff and they packaged it together in a new way, in a framework, and they called it Agile. So let's talk about what Agile is. Agile is a pragmatic approach that accepts the fact that we don't know what we don't know, and we're going to learn as we go. So part of Agile, and Agile is not just a process. It's not just about changing the processes and practices by which we deliver software. It's about truly thinking differently, accepting the fact that we don't know what we don't know, and as we learn better, we're going to do better. So we're going to base our plan based on the information that we have available today, kind of similar to what Waterfall should be, but with Agile, this concept is really emphasized, that we're going to just do very, very high-level planning initially, very, very high-level estimating, and then we're going to get started. And every time we finish a piece of the product, and we're going to get into this a little bit more detail, we're going to think about what we learned. So we're going to be doing what Waterfall calls lessons learned and Agile calls retrospectives very, very frequently. With Waterfall, we do lessons learned or retrospectives at the end of every major phase or at the end of the project, hopefully, right? Hopefully if you can get the team together for that. In Agile, we do them throughout, so we're constantly trying to think about what did we learn the last time in the last cycle and how do we incorporate those learnings now into what we're about to do next. And we update that and reflect it in our plan. So our plan is getting progressively more accurate, and we're going to be able to build a better solution because it's not just the plan, it's really the requirements and the overall product that we're building. We're constantly asking ourselves, what do we know now that we didn't know then? And we can incorporate that into our plan and the product that we're working on to deliver more accurately in terms of the timelines that we've given, as well as making sure the product is the best it can be. According to a 2002 study by a gentleman named Johnson, through the Standish Group, 64% of features are rarely or never used, which means there's a lot of waste in waterfall software development. with Agile, because we're going to be working in a cyclical manner, building out the product increments, we're going to be able to remove, hopefully, any features that might not be required. And it's through this constant learning process, as we learn more about the customer and what our customer wants, internally or externally, as well as the product, that we're able to identify maybe those features that we thought we really wanted, but maybe we don't actually need them, and remove them from our scope. So it's a flexible life cycle and a pragmatic approach that makes Agile unique and is able to deliver consistently higher business outcomes. And when I say that, one of the reasons why so many organizations are really quickly moving towards Agile, and as the title of this webinar suggests, Agile is becoming mainstream. And I want to share a really quick anecdote for you. I started being a facilitator. I was a facilitator, came on board with Global Knowledge about 3.5 years ago now as a facilitator, and they asked me specifically to come on board to deliver the Agile course. And Sarah, I don't know if you want me to share this, but I'm going to go ahead and share this. When I first started facilitating the course, I would get scheduled, Global Knowledge would schedule me to deliver the Agile course, and we kept getting canceled because we didn't have enough attendees. That was about 3.5 years ago, and I'm happy to say now that more and more people are realizing the value behind this incredibly powerful framework, which in the Agile community is called a transformational technology, because it just literally radically changes the way we do things and how we get to much significantly improve business outcomes. Now when our classes run, there's a significant, I run classes with 20 people, which is so exciting to see that so many people are interested in finding a way to really develop better IT products. So Agile is really about solving, and I'm going to go back for 1 second, a lot of these common problems. So it's a flexible methodology that allows us to constantly change our scope on an ongoing basis to really focus on what does the customer really want and what does the customer really need based on what we've learned about the product and what we've learned about the customer. We're constantly updating our plan at the end of every cycle, and I'm going to get more into the terminology in a second. We're updating our plan so our schedule becomes progressively more accurate based on what we've learned. So we're not basing this plan on assumptions that have assumptions that have assumptions. Rather, we're doing a high-level plan based on assumptions and constantly updating it on an ongoing basis. So we're able to deliver a more flexible product that more meets the needs of the business with less defects and accurately deliver on time because we have this flexible framework. So sometimes people talk about Agile as a methodology, and I like to call it a framework. And definitely, as I said, in the Agile community, they call it a transformational technology. One thing it's not is I want to dispel the notion that it is a methodology. It really isn't. A methodology is almost procedural, if I can say that. And Agile is anything but procedural. One of the common expressions is Agile is take it to the team, take it to the team. We really empower the team to decide what they think they need to do in order to deliver the software product. We really want them to be craftsmen, taking ownership for making the right decisions to build a product that's going to delight the customer. And to that extent, there really isn't a strict process to follow. It's up to the team to understand which Agile practices are best suited to meeting the requirements of the team. And it's based on a philosophy or a value system. And the Agile Manifesto is meant to be the value system that should inform the choices that the team makes. And that value system is that we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We don't want our software craftsmen to be drones and follow processes for processes' sake. We really want them to focus on having conversations with one another and having conversations with the customer to truly understand what is the value we're creating in delivering this product. Working software over comprehensive documentation. I want to tell a quick story. I worked with a PM once, and I came in one morning, and she was quite literally doing the happy dance in the aisle. And I said, well, what's going on? And she said, I'm really excited because my project plan is 92% complete. 92% complete really doesn't mean anything if that product is not valuable without 100% completion. So saying that you've done all of these documentations, all of this other stuff, but your code is not fully tested and ready to be put into production so that real users can start using it and getting business value, 92% is really irrelevant. So in the Agile world, we measure our progress by how much working software did we actually do, did we actually create, that the business can actually use to create value. customer collaboration over contract negotiation. We often know that customers put things in their requirements documents, and then we have conversations that start with, well, that's not exactly what I meant once we get to the UAT phase, user acceptance testing. With Agile, we're not going to pull out that requirements document and say, well, this is what you said you wanted. We're going to have conversations that really are focused on learning, well, how did you expect it to behave? What did you have in mind? And then as part of that constant adaptation through the flexibility, we're going to change it accordingly. Which leads me to my last point. We're responding to change over following a plan. The number one risk in software delivery, and I'm going to focus on software delivery, but this could really be applied to anything outside of software delivery as well, is delivering the wrong solution. So we're constantly responding to change over following a plan so that we're ensuring that we are delivering the right solution as conditions in our environment changes and as we start to learn more about the product and the customer. We've all seen this. Some organizations have very long delivery cycles. And if you did a requirements document, let's say today, and your delivery cycle is next July, well then what you thought you needed could be very different from what you're actually going to need next July. So we're letting our choices be dictated by this value system that we hold, which is really the philosophy that we follow. Individuals and interactions, working software, customer collaboration, and responding to change. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that, well, again, we value the items on the right more, we value the items on the left more, we still do the items on the right. We don't throw those out. We understand what do we absolutely have to follow, what do we absolutely have to do from a plan, contract, documentation, process tool. We do the absolute bare minimum of what's in the red to really allow us to focus on what's in the green, those items that we think are going to add the most value to the business. So this term called Agile, ambiguous. There's a lot of stuff going on out there, especially since Agile has really become mainstream in the past few years. There's a lot of different frameworks that are all considered to be part of the Agile family. Lean, many of us have probably heard of Lean, XP, Extreme Programming, Kanban, Scrum, RUP, that stands for Rational Unified Process, as well as DSDM, which stands for Dynamic Systems Development Method. All of these are considered to be Agile frameworks. They are all guided by the values that we just talked through. So when you hear these different terms thrown around, just understand that they're all slightly different frameworks, all of them considered to be Agile, all of them based on the principles of iterative development, and all of them guided by the values that we just discussed. Now I want to get into the interesting stuff. So let's talk about an Agile project lifecycle. And I just want to pause here for a second just to make a note. This lifecycle that we're going to be talking through right now that I want to guide you through is really Scrum. So this is the one that we're talking about. It could be very similar to things you've seen in the past for DSDM or potentially even for RUP, but it really is classically Scrum. So when I said that we are developing in cycles, this is what I'm talking about. So we are going to develop our software product in increments of 2 to 6 week cycles. And every 2 to 6 week cycle is going to result in features or functionality that will be added to the previous features and functionality that we've created. So we're really building our product incrementally. So we're going to start with initiation. Agile projects, they're still projects, just like Waterfall. And we're still going to start with the basics. We have our project vision, our project goals, our constraints, what's our schedule constraint, what's our budget constraint. Then we start with very high-level requirements. We're going to start with these things that we actually call user stories. A coarse grain requirement in the Agile world is referred to as a user story. Very, very high-level requirements, no detailed analysis here. Then, because we only have high-level requirements, it's only possible to produce a high-level estimate, a very kind of rough order of magnitude estimate. We're going to talk through all of this in a little bit more detail. And then, once we have that, we put those things together and we create a very high-level project plan. And this is where Agile starts to put more emphasis on the evolution of the plan. We tell our stakeholders from the very beginning, this is just a very high-level plan, and then we continuously refine it, not during initiation, but on an ongoing basis throughout the delivery of the software. So these are all of our key outcomes of our product, of our project initiation phase. Then we move into the first phase of the Agile project, or of the Agile iteration, and sometimes it's called an iteration, sometimes it's calling it a sprint. Iteration or sprint, the terms are interchangeable. We're going to plan our iteration, and when we plan our iteration, we're going to select which requirements or which features, more specifically, not components, but features, things a real-world user can actually do with the solution. We're going to identify which features do we want to work on in this next sprint or in this next iteration. We're going to identify them based on what we think is based on what the business tells us has the most value. So we're always working on the highest value features first, and how many does the team think that they can take on during that 2 to 6 week period. Once we've identified those features that we're going to work on, then what we do is we start to get into detailed requirements analysis. We meet with our key stakeholders and we start to understand, what does this really look like? What does this have to be, or how does it have to behave in order for it to solve the problem that you're trying to solve? And that's where we do our detailed requirements analysis and we come up with what is our acceptance criteria. So we collaborate with our customer in coming up with something that is considered to be good. And from there, we start to identify the different tasks, so the team together works collaboratively to identify all of the tasks and activities that need to happen to take that feature from a conversation we've just had with our customer and transform it into shippable code. So code that by the end of the cycle, we could actually put into production if we wanted to. So thinking about going through all of the steps of the software development life cycle, designing it, coding it, testing it, documenting it maybe, creating training materials maybe, everything that has to happen before we consider that feature ready to go to production. From there, the team is going to work collaboratively, building those features out. And to do that, one of the tools that the team uses is daily stand-up meetings. So Agile teams work collaboratively. They are self-organizing. And one of the key differences that we're going to talk about in just one moment is we don't necessarily have titles. So we don't have BAs, business analysis, developers, quality assurance people. We still do have different individuals that have different skill sets, but we're really a team collectively, leaving our titles at the door and pitching in, contributing our skills and our talents wherever is necessary to get these features completed by the end of the sprint based on our agreement with the customer. We do our daily stand-up meetings, and that's how we organize ourselves. And then at the end of the sprint, or the 2 to 6 week cycle, probably the last day or close to the last day, we're going to bring our stakeholders back, and we're going to ask them to review with us the product that we just did. And we're going to ask them, based on what we discussed at the beginning of the sprint, is this what you wanted? So we're actually able to demonstrate for them what we created, and that's really exciting for customers, and it's also a delighter because they're used to these really long cycles. They go away for months at a time, and then they come back, and if they do have changes, it's kind of too late. You know, we give them the age-old answer, we'll wait for phase 2. Here, they're able to see the results of the conversations that they had only 2 to 6 weeks later. So this is really a good thing for the business. It's also a really good thing for IT, because so often in traditional software development, we have this conversation and they tell us what they want, and then they come back and they say, well, that's not exactly what we had in mind. And then you get a little bit of, he said, she said. With Agile, because you're having these conversations every 2 to 6 weeks, by the end of the project, the business is just as accountable as IT for what got delivered. If the business isn't happy, then the question becomes, well, why didn't you say anything every time we did these reviews? In addition to the review, the demonstration of the product increment that we created, the team also gets together to have that retrospective, that lessons learned session. And we all ask ourselves, what went well during the sprint? What didn't go so well that we'd like to improve upon next time? And then last but not least, they're going to take that feedback, and I'm just going to build my slide here, and they're going to adapt to change. They're going to update that high-level plan. They're going to update their requirements. They might even re-estimate some of their high-level course grain requirements, and then, of course, the entire cycle repeats. One of the things that I wanted to add to this is when we're going through this process, it's important to note that Agile teams don't always deliver at the end of, they always deliver what they promise to deliver, at least that's our goal, but it doesn't necessarily mean it gets released to production. The team, as well as the customer, will decide when we release to production. Generally speaking, the teams will go through 2, 3, 4, 5 sprints or iterations to develop enough code such that it makes sense to do a release, because as we all know, there's a significant amount of overhead in a release. Now let's talk about an Agile team. What does an Agile team look like? And it's a little bit different. We have different roles on an Agile project than we would on a traditional project. We have 3 roles. We have the product owner, and the product owner is not a project sponsor. These 2 concepts are not similar. The product owner is really responsible for creating the vision of what the product will be. The product owner works on a day-to-day basis in close collaboration with the team to really communicate to the team that's building this product exactly what the customer needs. So the product owner, again, is responsible for what gets built, coming up with a vision, communicating the vision, and representing the needs of the customer to the business, what the customer needs. We also call the product owner the single ringable neck, because it's the product owner that's accountable to the organization for making sure that the right thing gets built and that the product owner is making the right choices, making sure that the right features get into that product and that the product is delivered on time and on budget. And that is a huge shift, because in the traditional world, it's the project manager who's accountable for making sure it's delivered on time, on budget. Here, the product owner, who's typically on the business side, is responsible for coming up not just with the features, which typically are the requirements, but also collaborating with the team on a day-to-day basis and being responsible for both the schedule as well as the budget. Then we have all of our team members. The team needs to determine what skills they need on their project, and as I said before, once we identify the skills, we kind of drop our titles at the door and everyone just pitches in doing what they are able based on what the team needs to meet their commitment to the business, delivering what the features that they agreed to by the end of that sprint. So do whatever is necessary. And then we have the role of our Agile coach. So the coach is not a project manager. The coach is not responsible for assigning work. The coach is not responsible for creating the plan. The coach is not responsible for managing the schedule. The coach is not even really responsible for resolving impediments. So I've told you what the coach does not do. Let me tell you what the coach does do. The coach is really a mirror of the team, helping them understand what they're doing well and what they're not doing well, and not by giving direction, but by asking them open-ended, context-free questions that encourage them to reflect on how they're doing and identify opportunities to do better. The coach also protects the team from any kind of distraction or organizational noise, so that when they are working through their sprint, they can be really focused on that, creating as much high-value software as possible. The coach also removes impediments only when it's not possible for the team to remove their own impediments or where it doesn't add any additional value to the team. But if possible, the coach teaches the team how to remove their own impediments. Effectively, the coach is a servant leader, which is the term we use in Agile, trying to help the team to be the most effective versions of themselves. So in sum, we have some key Agile concepts here. Agile is about learning and adaptation, collaboration, the team collaborating with one another, customer focus, our teams are self-directed, the team assigns themselves work, the team estimates the work, and the team works together in their daily stand-up meetings throughout the sprint to make sure that the work is being distributed in such a manner that we're able to complete all of the features by the end of the cycle. We're committed to technical excellence, and we're using lean principles to try to reduce waste. Sarah, at this point, I think I'd like to hand it back to you to do our first poll.
All right, let me go ahead and launch that. So just give me 1 second, everybody, and you should see a poll on your screen in your GoToWebinar viewer. So to participate in our poll, please just select the answer that best describes yourself right on the screen. So to what extent is your organization following the Agile framework? Not at all. We're exploring the possibility of employing some Agile methods. We're using some of the Agile methods on some projects. Some of our projects are being delivered using Agile, or we are moving towards a fully Agile organization. So just give everyone a moment, and I will encourage you as well to ask any questions in the questions pane. And again, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar afterwards. All right, it looks like a lot of people have managed to vote, so let me go ahead and close that and share the results with everyone. All right, so Julianne, our top answer is using some of the Agile methods on some projects with 36%. And then each with 22 and 24, we have exploring the possibility and some of our projects. Now, only 3%, we are moving towards a fully Agile organization, and not at all 15%. What do you think of these results? Are these in line with what your experience is?
Well, first of all, I'm really excited to hear that 36% of organizations are starting to use some Agile methods. I think that's absolutely fantastic and really encouraging to me that the software industry is hopefully what I believe moving in a good direction. So thank you, everybody, for your input. I think that's fabulous. And I'm going to leave some time at the end to answer any questions that you guys may have for those of you that are considering moving towards Agile, and certainly for those of you that are doing Agile, if you've run into any challenges or you want to go a little bit deeper to ask any questions that you may have. So perfect. Thanks, Sarah.
All right.
So thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to start to go through in a little bit more detail. How does this actually come together? Because we've kept the conversation kind of conceptual and academic at this point. So let's get into some detail. So what the heck is a user story? I get asked this all the time. What's the difference between a user story and a requirement? So a user story in the Agile community is considered to be a card, a conversation, and a confirmation. So with Agile, we like to actually write our user stories on cards for a number of reasons. First of all, people tend to remember stories better. So human beings really aren't as advanced as we think we are, and we can remember things that are told to us in stories a lot better than we can remember requirements. And that ability to remember it gives us a lot better ability to be able to have conversations on an ongoing basis to collaborate about what the solution really needs to look like. We don't have to pull out that requirements document. Most of us will be able to say, hey, I remember we have a story on this. So it helps to facilitate a conversation. That's the first thing. The second thing we have these user stories for is because it helps us also understand the business value. And this is where we're really trying to engage our developers to kind of step up to the plate, not that they're not already, and really become true partners, not just sometimes, and I know this might be a bit harsh, but order takers. We really want to engage in a conversation because they're the craftsmen, they're the engineers, they're bringing their talents to the table to really build this thing and figure out what makes sense based on what the need is. So we capture a user story in a specific syntax as a user, so who's using it, what do they need it for, what's the functionality they're requesting, and what exactly is the business purpose? Why do they need it? And by following this format, it really helps us to think about who's the user and what's the purpose for doing this, and we can create a better solution. It invites us to do something called user-centric design. And the example I always like to give people, it's not a perfect example, but I think it makes the point. You're going to design a car very differently if you are designing it for my 70-year-old mother, or she probably wouldn't be very happy that I said that out loud, my 70-year-old mother versus if you are designing a car for a young family, maybe late 20s, early 30s with a few kids. You're going to design it very differently. You're going to design that car very differently if you know this person lives in the city and it's an urban car, or if you know that this person lives in a remote area and maybe they have really horrible weather conditions. So by understanding who the user is, what their need is, a little bit about their environment, and what their purpose is, it invites us to do user-centric design. The other reason why we write user stories and not use cases is because the user stories are very high level. As you can see, this is all we're capturing. This is as much as a requirement as we have, folks, just as the user, what they need, so that. And this encourages us to have the conversation later once we've determined that we're going to work on the story in the sprint. And the purpose for doing that is we want to incorporate the lean principles of reducing waste. Oftentimes, if we get into that detailed analysis at the beginning, and then for whatever reason we decide that we're not actually going to implement this feature, all of the time and effort spent doing the detailed analysis, capturing those requirements, is now waste because we've decided that we're not going to implement it after all. So this very high-level user story encourages us to have a dialogue. So it encourages dialogue, which we know creates better shared understanding. It helps us remember, again, what it is that we're trying to create, the different features in the product, and it also helps us reduce waste. The example on the right-hand side would be, as a data manager, I need productivity numbers for each data entry operator so I can reward good productivity and take corrective action on bad productivity. And the little note on the bottom there is if we have any additional information from the stakeholders, we may want to include that on the back, and that then becomes what's known as our acceptance criteria. So what does it actually need to do when we test it in order for our stakeholders to consider that story accepted? Now I want to talk about estimating. This is absolutely one of my favorite slides, and I refer to it all the time. In the waterfall world, our goal is to be both precise and accurate. And my experience is that typically doesn't happen. It doesn't matter how much time, how much effort you put into being both precise and accurate. It just rarely comes together like that because Murphy is alive and well. Things do change. We learn more. It just doesn't happen. Oftentimes we try to be precise and accurate, but in my experience, we end up imprecise and inaccurate. Now, precise but inaccurate is not bad either, because I'm looking at the example on the upper right-hand corner, because at least we're consistently off target. So maybe we could adjust by an X factor and give a better estimate in terms of when we think we're going to be done and how much it's going to cost. But with Agile, what we're trying to do is we're really trying to put ourselves in the lower left-hand corner. We're not trying to be precise, but we're trying to consistently hit the target. And again, we don't have a lot of information to estimate on, so we couldn't even be precise as we wanted. If I said estimate a user story, and here's your user story, this is all the information you have, you couldn't be precise because you just don't have enough detail to get there. And that's okay. We're okay with that because, again, if we were to spend the time and effort required to get that detailed estimate and we decided not to do the story, that would be waste. And as we learn more, we're going to constantly re-estimate anyways. So with Agile, we're looking for imprecise but also accurate. In order to do that, Agile uses a specific methodology to estimate that's probably a little bit different than what you've been exposed to before. We use relative estimating using this thing called story points. And I'll be really candid, story points for me was the absolute hardest part to get used to because I want to know how many days is it, are we talking about effort, are we talking about duration, how complex it is, are we baking the risk factor into it. I was definitely one of those project managers. A story point is what is referred to as a NUT, a nebulous unit of time. It's not time, it's not effort, it's not duration. It's a comparison. We take all of our user stories at the beginning of our project once we've got all of our user stories identified, and then we determine which one of the user stories happens to be the mathematical median. That one becomes the 5. And we're going to compare all of our stories to the 5. And we're going to ask ourselves, is it twice as big? If it's twice as big, that means it might be an 8 or a 13. So is it slightly more than twice as big, or is it slightly less than twice as big? And we compare all of our stories to the 5, and that's how we come up with our story point value. And to do that, we play a game called Planning Poker. Everybody on the team gets a set of cards, and together we discuss each story very briefly for 1 to 2 minutes, not more than that, because remember, we're not going for precision, we're looking for accuracy. And then everybody gets to vote on what they believe the story point estimate happens to be. If we have consensus, no further discussion is allowed. We move on and repeat the process for the next story. Short discussion followed by voting. If we do not have consensus, if we have variance, then we ask the team member who has the highest vote to explain and the lowest vote to explain their rationale, and then we repeat the process. We vote again until we have consensus. And this is kind of similar to the Delphi technique, where all team members are equal, and it eliminates any kind of bias, and it also means, again, all team members are equal and have the opportunity to express what they think the value is. So it really kind of eliminates any potential bias or rankism amongst the team. Once we've gone ahead and done that, now we want to go into planning our Agile project. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to establish some time boxes. And time boxes are a construct used in Agile to really enforce discipline and allow us to plan and support our incremental development. So the first time box we're going to use is we're going to establish the project time box. And it's actually our product owner who gives us the project time box. They're going to say the project has to be done by this date if it's a date-driven project, or the project has to be done by this date if it's a featured, or sorry, if the project has to be done by this date if it happens to be that they're running out of budget. So we know when they're going to run out of money. So it's either going to be budget-driven or potentially date-driven. Sometimes, of course, it might be both. So it's going to be the product owner who's going to give us our project end date when the project has to be completed by, that's either driven by days or dollars. Once we have that, then the team is going to decide how long their sprint or their iteration is going to be. And they're going to choose that sprint or iteration using the guidelines of 2 to 6 weeks. And they're going to decide 2 to 6 weeks, that will become their sprint and iteration duration. And then simply divide what's our project time box divided by the number of weeks in our sprint, and that will tell us how many sprints or iterations we happen to have. In selecting how long we want the sprint to be, it really is a team decision based on how big the user stories are, based on how many people are on the team, but we always prefer shorter sprints to longer sprints. The reason for this is because we want to fail fast to learn fast. If we're struggling in a sprint, if we're failing, we want to fail fast, have that retrospective, get the feedback, learn what we need to learn, and then replan and start fresh and start a new sprint. Also, speeding up those feedback cycles means we're going to learn more faster about ourselves as a team, about our customer, the product owner, and about the product and the technology we're working on. So speeding up those feedback cycles speeds up the learning, increases our overall quality and performance. How do we track progress on an Agile project? Agile teams use something called velocity. Velocity is purely an expression of how many story points we're able to complete per sprint or per iteration. As you can see here, we have our actual, and it ping-pongs up and down. And we're going to track it on an ongoing basis because our trend line, if you will, is going to be used to forecast when we think we're going to be done our project or finished certain features. We're going to say, hypothetically, if we have 100 story points worth of work and we are finishing about 10 story points per sprint, simply do the division, and that's when all of the work is going to be complete. So Agile planning is actually super easy in that specific regard. A quick note about velocity. I want to be really clear that velocity is not about the team performance. It's loosely tied to the team performance for sure, but there's many different things that are going to affect velocity. Sometimes, for reasons beyond our control, stories get blocked. They can't be completed. Has nothing to do with the team's performance. I was working with a team and our environments kept going down. Had nothing to do with the team's performance. People take vacation, especially this time of year. Has nothing to do with the team performance. So velocity is really used not as a progress measurement tool, but really as a tool to forecast when our features or when the project is going to be completed simply by adding up the number of story points remaining, dividing by the number of story points we've been completing per sprint or per iteration to communicate to our stakeholders when we're going to be complete the project and when we're going to be completed specific features that we're working on. This is what an Agile plan might look like. We have all of our stories, and they're prioritized. And it's the product owner, again, who prioritizes these stories according to the business value. We're always working on those stories that have the highest business value, and then moving to those stories that have the lowest business value. And this is where sometimes stories often get dropped. We say, well, it has low business value, and other stuff has come up since we first identified our user stories, and we'd rather work on this than work on that. So some stories, even though they're in the product backlog, they just never end up getting delivered. The team decides what stories are going to go into what sprints based on what they project their velocity to be, and then together with the product owner, they'll discuss and decide how often they want to release their particular product. So that would be our overall release plan. And the Scrum Master, working with the team to update the estimates. The team constantly updates estimates, and the product owner may add stories or delete stories or change stories in the product backlog, would update the plan at the end of every single sprint. So in this regard, the plan iterations and releases is constantly evolving at the end of every sprint based on the changes that have been made to the prioritized stories and the changes that have occurred to the velocity forecast. Now we have our plan. We're going to pull stuff into the sprint. We're going to decide what user stories we want to work on, and we're always trying to pick from the user stories that are at the top of that prioritized list. We're actually going to get into the detail. Now this is where some teams have a conversation with their stakeholders, and they actually create detailed requirements, such as a use case. Now use cases are used by some Agile teams, but by no means all Agile teams. What's really key is that we have a conversation with our product owner who represents the customers to truly understand what he or she had in mind for that feature, because they know the customer best. They know what the customer needs that feature to do in order to be able to add value. So we have that conversation, and if the team decides, we capture that in the form of a use case. Once we've gone ahead and we've done that, what we're going to do next is we're going to figure out, the team has to figure out, what are the tasks that have to be completed in order to take this particular feature or user story from what it is today, again, just really notes on a piece of paper or a use case or however we've captured that description, into something that we can potentially put into production. So let's just walk through one here, and I'm pretty sure you're going to see this is kind of like a standard project. We have three stories here, M, H, and L. As an X, I need Y, so that Z. And for this particular user story, we've identified 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 particular tasks. So we're going to do those tasks in order to be able to make to put the story into production. And these letters are not quite as random as I may have indicated, but it actually indicates the priority of the story. We have high priority story, medium priority story, and low priority story. And the team is actually going to work on the highest priority story first, and then the medium priority story second, and then the low priority story third. So we're prioritizing our stories not just for the project overall, but even within the sprint. The goal in Agile, using lean principles, is start less, finish more, minimizing the work in progress. And when I coach my teams, I always like to ask them, what would you rather? Would you rather have 5 stories that are all 80% complete? Or would you rather have 4 stories complete and 1 story not started at all? I'm hoping you're saying the latter, because the first example, 5 stories, 80% complete, if they're all 80% complete, I can't do anything with them. By contrast, if I have 4 stories that I can put into production, and that 5th story just, for whatever reason the team ran out of time, I've at least created value that the business can use. So we prioritize our stories within the sprint, we identify the tasks, estimate the tasks, assign the tasks, and then start to work on them in priority order, making sure that we're minimizing our work in progress. So start less, finish more should be our guiding principle. Now I want to talk a little bit about self-directed teams, and we've touched upon this already when we were talking about the different roles in Agile, and I want to kind of go here again. Agile teams are self-directed teams. It's really up for the team to decide how they're going to work, and this is fairly different than our traditional projects. Traditional projects operate on command and control leadership. Generally speaking, not all project managers do, but that's the conventional wisdom, where the leader plans and estimates the project, the leader assigns the work to the team members, the leader balances the workload, so distribution, they are the face of the project to the organization, and they also are responsible for resolving any issues that come up. In an Agile project, we flip that on its head. The team plans and estimates. The team decides their tasks. The team balance their workload. The team reports the status. And the team also is responsible for taking corrective action if need be. And they do that through the use of the daily stand-up meeting. So with our daily stand-up meetings, the team gets together, same time, same place, every day for about 15 minutes, and together they ask themselves 3 questions. What did I do yesterday? What am I going to get done today? And what's getting in my way? What issues or impediments might I have? And by answering these 3 questions, everybody on the team should be well aware of what everybody else is doing. And it's important to understand why we do this. We do this because we want the team to take collective ownership of creating these features, the number of features that they agreed to the business. In other words, if I have a problem or if I'm blocked, it's not my problem. It's the team's problem. So if I say, hey, I didn't really get done everything that I said I'd get done yesterday, I wasn't feeling well, I went home early, it's really up to the team members to say, are we in jeopardy? How can we help? And that's really what the team is doing. If I have a problem, it's just as much the team's problem as my problem, because it's a sense of collective ownership. And also, by understanding what everybody is working on, the team can get a really good sense of how are they doing in their sprint and iteration. Is their sprint and iteration in jeopardy? Are they in jeopardy of not being able to finish all of their tasks? And then, of course, they can take collective action. And to do that, we use a tool. Of course, there are some tools in Agile. We prefer individuals and interactions over processes and tools, but there are tools that we use. And as you can see, one of the tools that we use is a task board, where we're going to identify what are the stories, what are the associated tasks, and where are they in their life cycle. And the life cycle, if it's in progress, blocked, or for verification, again, is up to the team to decide. Sarah, why don't we take this time to do a quick poll?
All right, let me go ahead and launch that. Just a reminder, everyone, just click on your GoToWebinar viewer to cast your vote on the one that best describes your organization's culture. So the question is, our organization is very much about control. We're somewhat agile, encourages limited self-organization and initiative, and very much so. We encourage learning and collaboration. All right, we'll give everyone just a second. We will have time for a few questions at the end too. So if everyone would like to ask a question, just to pop it into the questions pane, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can. All right, Julianne, looks like we have the majority of people answering, so I'm going to go ahead and share that poll. So our organization and culture is very much about control, 26%. Somewhat, our culture encourages limited self-organization and initiative, 46%. And very much so, our culture encourages learning and collaboration, 27%.
Excellent. Well, that's fabulous to hear. So I'm seeing that there's a lot of people that are already kind of experimenting with Agile, and a lot of people, their culture seems to be fairly aligned to the Agile principles. So that's really encouraging to hear. And I think as we continue to go on this journey where more companies are adopting Agile, I think we'll continue to see the shift towards more collaboration. And I'm just going to say this really quickly. There are different methodologies out there, and we talked about the the different frameworks. I shouldn't use the methodology word, but different frameworks out there under the Agile umbrella. For those of you that are thinking about going down this Agile road or going further if you're already on the journey, you want to look into the different methodologies or frameworks, and you want to pick one that is suited to your culture. Scrum tends to be very much suited to a culture that's very much about collaboration, or at least is leaning towards collaboration. Kanban would be a great Agile framework if your organization is more about control. DSDM is also great, where there's more of that control, as well as RUP is also good for, I'd say, both control cultures as well as collaboration cultures. So based on your organization's culture, you want to find an Agile method that's going to work for you. So we're almost at the end here, folks. Just a couple final words about the end of the Agile lifecycle. So once we get to the end and we're doing our product demo, we've created our product, we're going to demo the product with the product owner, and our product owner is going to say, yes, this is exactly aligned with my vision, this is exactly what I had in mind, in which case the story is considered complete. We move on. Or the product owner might say, yeah, I love it, but I have some ideas for changes or new stories, in which case we're going to write new stories right there and then. The product owner is going to prioritize them in the product backlog, that list of prioritized stories that we haven't yet worked on, and the team is going to estimate them. So we kind of repeat exactly the cycle that we did initially. Possibly, though, we may find ourselves in a situation where the story is completely rejected, in which case there's a miscommunication between the team and the product owner, in which case we would sit down, we would rewrite the story in a way that makes it clear to both parties, and again, that story too would go back into the product backlog, again, our list of possible stories that we're going to implement, and it would get prioritized and re-estimated. After that, the entire cycle repeats. So this brings us to the end of our content portion of the webinar. I hope that it was informative for you. And now what I'd like to do, Sarah, is I'd like to open the floor for questions and take as many questions as we have time to.
Okay, so Julianne, what we'll do is We do have a roster of questions here. I will let everyone know that if you do have questions now or even afterwards, do feel free to tweet us at GK Canada using the hashtag GK Summer School for the webinar. So we are actively on Twitter. So I have a couple of questions. Right off the bat, Julianne, where do project managers and business analysts fit into Agile projects?
Okay, great question, and that's a question that certainly comes up a lot. So sometimes I hear rumors, oh, there's no role for the project manager, and that is very much not the case. And I think I'd like to use myself as an example. I was a project manager, and I became a Scrum Master using the Scrum methodology, managing Agile projects. Some project managers will easily make the transition to Scrum Master, letting go of those controlling ways. For me, it was a challenge, I won't lie. Other project managers might say, not really for me. I don't really want to be Scrum Master, servant leader to the team. And those project managers tend to take on more of a program manager role, where they manage something called Scrum of Scrums in the Scrum world, coordinating projects in kind of a program management capacity, really supporting the Scrum Masters in that regard. Other project managers will embrace the role of Scrum Master. And oftentimes, because it is a servant leadership role, a project manager will be supporting multiple Scrum teams simultaneously. In terms of the role of the BA, the business analyst often works directly with the product owner. So helping the product owner to write stories, sometimes going out and gathering information that the team needs to have that conversation, or gathering information to maybe validate what the product owner is looking for in the story. So the BA, definitely still a role for the BA in the Agile world. The BA is working closely with the product owner to help him or her represent their vision to the team. The BA is also doing exploratory testing, again, on behalf of the product owner, and oftentimes performing UAT on behalf of the product owner. So the BA becomes almost an extension of the product owner. Where we want to be careful is we don't want our product owner to be an absentee product owner, delegating all of their responsibilities to the BA. The product owner should still be engaged, where the BA acts as an assistant, certainly not a proxy, because the product owner is the one throat to choke. So it's really important that they stay engaged and available to the team, using business analysts to really help them define their vision, articulate the vision, and do the testing. So they work really closely together.
Great. We've had a couple questions about remote teams. So, can you speak a little bit about how Agile can be used to teams that are working remotely from each other?
Right. Thank you for the question. That's a great question. So right now I'm actually currently working with a remote team. We've got a team in North America, and we also have another team working in India. And interestingly enough, our product team is working on the West Coast. So we are really a remote team. Our product owners are on the West Coast of North America. Our delivery team, or half of them anyways, is on the East Coast of North America, and our development QA team is actually situated in India. So Agile works actually really well for remote teams because Agile increases the transparency. We're working in these really tight cycles. Everybody has to work really closely together, and we see what's going on if there's any problems earlier or any miscommunication. So Agile tends to surface any communication problems associated with globally distributed delivery really quickly, so it works extremely well. However, let's be honest, Agile was really intended, I think, and I might be overspeaking that one, but it was really thought of as having co-located teams, of having everybody working together to really foster that osmotic communication and that collaboration. So when we're using Agile to manage a project, use it with a geographically distributed team, we really want to think about the tools that we're using and investing time up front in putting some ground rules, some team norms, a communication plan in place that's going to guide how the team works together. And there's a lot of wonderful tools out there that are free on the internet that replicate the Agile tools that we would use. And really, I like to go light on tools. You only really need a task board. You need a parking lot for anything that needs to be addressed, an issue log, and maybe a next step list. And I like to use really visual tools. I'm going to throw it out here. One of my team members just came up with a great tool called See Now Do that replicates task boards. It's fantastic and free. Other tools work well, such as Stormboard. I also really encourage my remote teams to try to replicate that face-to-face experience by using tools that allow them to communicate face-to-face, such as using FaceTime, Apple product, of course, using Skype, or whatever encourages you to really get that face-to-face experience. The other thing that's key for remote teams is really sharing the burden of overcoming the time zones. So some teams agree to come in a little bit early, some teams agree to come in a little bit late. But Agile absolutely can be done extremely successfully with remote teams. And if you're working remotely, you should not consider that an obstacle to doing Agile or going Agile.
Fantastic. Well, actually, we have a lot of questions that are coming in, but we are out of time. Before I let you all go, I want to just let our audience know about some of our tools. So on your screen, you'll see our Twitter handle and a hashtag. We'll be talking about Agile and business training all summer. We do have a webinar series coming up, which is Summer School, which is Broaden Your Business Skills. So check this out and other great webinars at globalknowledge.ca. We do have a knowledge center as well, where we have some great blog postings about Agile that relate to a lot of questions that you're asking. And quickly, I wanted to let you know that we are offering a promotion right now. This summer, take any eligible course and receive a $500 Amazon.ca gift certificate. The website is on your screen. Julianne, thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah, and thank you to all of you who joined in. It was a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak on Agile.
Amazing. Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day. You can now disconnect.